Thanks, Rachel. Hey, and thanks, Ali, for sharing a bit of your story. That's cool. I was in college also when got baptized. It was a different experience. I just remember being told you're supposed to be baptized, and I said, I am. Like if you're following Christ, you're supposed to do it. I was like, all right. And I was, and I'm really grateful I did. You know, for me, it was the metaphor of being united to the death and resurrection of Jesus, knowing that his death counted for me, and now I participate in his new life. And that whole metaphor has just gone with me ever since then. So if you're ready, we'd love to talk to you about it. If you're not ready, we'd still love to talk to you about it. It's a great opportunity for you to interact with God about something that's really, really important. And I always love the way we celebrate. It's usually a great time. Anyway, hey, we like Rachel said, we're in a series called From Platforms to Pillars. And I'm putting together a little video that I'm going to release later this week that tells you a little bit more of my heart around it. But we live in a world that thinks everything gets done on a platform. And we live in a world that's trying to force you into a platform. But almost all good things happen underneath a canopy where there are pillars. And our hope through this series that wherever you go in life, you're going to be a pillar in your community, in your neighborhood, in your workplace, maybe in your classroom or on your sports team, in your family. If you think about what a pillar does, it holds up a refuge and protection and makes more space for others. The more pillars, the more space. The more space, the more protection. We live in a world that is shredding all the institutions, and there's few places, safe places where people can go and just trust and find places of belonging. People get left alone with their screens as their only point of contact with the rest of this world, and they lose the opportunity to have real community, real belonging. It takes pillars to hold up a place of refuge and protection for others, allow others to belong and to be with one another. And that's our hope, that's going to be true of you wherever you go. Wherever you go, whether you're at 938 Church, another home, another community, someday when you're in that 85 and over community, we hope that you are a pillar there because people need refuge. People need belonging. All right, so that's one reason why we're doing this series. The second reason we're doing this series is it gives us an opportunity to talk about the spiritual gifts. The New Testament talks a lot about this. No, I should say this. The New Testament talks very specifically about how the Holy Spirit gives gifts to his people in order to carry out the functions of God, to shepherd his people. The New Testament doesn't say a lot about them, but it's very specific about them. And what I have found is that when you are functioning within the gift that God has given you, you can be like Captain America. You can do this all day long. You have all sorts of endurance to take on challenges. You can persevere when things don't go well. Your character isn't shaken when things aren't going well, right? Why? Because you are doing what you do. You are using your gifts. And when you do that, you have a sense of, you have a sense where you feel closer to God. And as you feel closer to God, you have the ability to express his joy and his peace and contentment in what you do and the way you do it. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean like you're always going to get it right. But as a church matures, when people find their gifting, they reveal God in that gifting more and more and more. If your gift is not teaching, and we constantly ask you to teach, you're going to be stressed and you're going to be miserable, and that's not going to reveal God, right? If your gift is if you don't have the mercy gift, and we continue to put you in situations where you need to express mercy, it's just not going to be pretty for anybody. But when you're functioning in the context of your gifts, you can talk like Eric Liddell spoke. You might remember Eric Liddell. If you're into old movies, You might remember Chariots of Fire. Yes, it's an old movie now, guys. Come on, it's an old movie. And he was a sprinter. He was an Olympic sprinter, and he was a Christian. He's got a powerful story of his faith connected to his athleticism. But what he said, when I run, I feel his pleasure. And our hope is along the way you're learning what your gifts are so that when you express that gift, you learn to feel his pleasure. We've covered several different gifts, from mercy to faith to a variety of teaching gifts to leadership and administration. Last week we talked about encouragement. The New Testament has a whole set of them. And hopefully you're finding what your gift might be. Our hope is that you're valuing all of the gifts, because at one level, just because somebody else has the gift of encouragement doesn't get you off the hook. Just because somebody else has the gift of mercy, you still need to express mercy from time to time, right? So we want to value all the gifts, but along the way, we want to identify our own. We have a QR code, I believe, that if you want to click on, that takes you to what you'd call a spiritual gifts test. And it's a little survey that just kind of helps you kind of survey how you've participated in different things. So maybe you can get a little bit of a closer sense of how God has gifted you and what it would look like for you to use your gifts among the people of God. And my suspicion, as you are able to do what you do and do it well, what you will find is that as you consistently do that, you'll find yourself to be a pillar creating space for more and more people. So today I want to talk to you about the gift of giving. And this is going to be fun, because when you find people with a gift of giving, they are shameless about their money. No, seriously, they carry their money without shame. They don't mind. They're fine buying nice things because they just want to buy nice things and let people enjoy it. They are looking for ways to give to other people in a variety of ways. They think about how much more money they could make in terms of how much more they can give to others. They creatively find ways to give stuff to people. They creatively find ways to fund different kinds of ministries. They often think entrepreneurially about how to create an income stream in order to fund this ministry or fund this opportunity or lift this person out of a difficult situation. They love it and they're shameless with it. And they're not people with the gift of giving don't necessarily have more money than other people. They may have a lot more less money than you, but they're still creatively finding ways to use the little they have to bless others. But people with a gift of giving are finding any way they can to give because they just feel so much closer to God. And like all the statistics say, people who give consistently are just almost across the board happier than those who don't. Is like, what do you know? Jesus says, more blessed to give than receive. It's more happy to give than receive. And these folks have figured it out. And man, they can't wait to figure out another way to give a little bit more. And they are shameless about it. And this is really helpful because a lot of people feel really ashamed about their money. And it's not an uncommon thing for wealthy people to feel shame about their money. Because if we all thought about our own finances, we all know that we probably should have more of it. We can all look back at the dumb things we bought. We can all look at the bad idea of that investment. We can all look at we thought was a good idea, or we could just look back and say, how many things was I selfish about? And you have people who go back and they'll totally guilt you by saying, what if all those Starbucks coffee were never purchased? Well, how many poor nations in Africa could be funded, right? All these things, right? People will do that to you when it comes to their money. And you have no idea how much shame gets spread all over your lives about all that you don't have and all that you could have done, on what your 401k ought to be like. There's all this shame around the money, which makes you never want to talk to anybody about your money. You will actually rather talk to somebody about their political ideology than rather tell them about your money, right? Why? Because the world has just poured so much shame on it. People with a spiritual gift of giving aren't ashamed. They've received so much from God, they are content with it, and they can't find ways to give more to other people. People with the spiritual gift of giving are shameless. And that may be you, that may not be you, it may be you, and may someday be you. We can grow into these gifts. But what we want to do is, hey, maybe you have the gift of leadership, maybe you have the gift of faith. We want to value the gift of faith. We want to value the gift of leadership. We want to value the gift of giving. And we want to be inspired by these people so that we can walk into the blessed, enjoyable life that they live every single day. All right. So what I want to do is I want to read a story. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story and enter into a story of the early church. Now, somewhere around 20 years after the death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus, the church is starting to explode throughout the Roman world, and it's popping up in all these cities throughout the Roman Empire, and it's spreading into Turkey. It's going across Europe. And the Apostle Paul is interacting with these churches, and one of the churches he helped get started was in the church of Corinth. He also helped get some churches going in a place called Macedonia. We would know the term Philippi, right? So he's getting all these churches going. And meanwhile, what happens in the midst of this is that it just stops raining in Israel. And so everybody in Palestine area is really struggling through a famine. And the Christians in particular are having a hard time, right? Because they're persecuted. People are like, this is new, we don't like this. And so they're getting on the wrong end of any sort of help. And so the rest of the churches in all the cities hear about this and be like, wait, those are the ones who gave us the gospel in the first place. What if we put together an offering and send it back and help the people in Jerusalem? So all the churches signed up. They're like, yeah, this is great. Well, the Corinthian church is like the Chester County of the new church, right? The Corinthians were the best educated. They were the healthiest, the wealthiest, the wisest, the most proud. They had all sorts of jacked up issues in that church. But part of it was because of how gifted they were. They were the best speakers. They were the best communicators. They thought the Apostle Paul was kind of a sloth as far as his communication ability. And so they would pick on him around that. This was the sort of things that was going on, right? So they're trying to figure out this financial situation, right? And the Apostle Paul is writing him a letter and pauses and says, hey, I want to tell you a little bit about what's going on in Philippi. All right? Philippi, and he calls them the Macedonian churches. And so, like, if Corinth is Westchester, Macedonia is Codesville. Okay? So just get the context in that world, right? And hear how Paul teaches them about the grace of giving. Remember, all right, you might get a little bit weirded out, and shame might start making you stop wanting to listen, right? Let's be shameless, at least for the next 20 minutes, all right? See if we can just hear what God has to say and hear how Paul describes the grace of giving. And I'm going to read it with the enthusiasm that I think Paul had. He says, and now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overwhelming joy and their extreme poverty, it welled up in rich generosity. For I testify, they gave as much as they were able, even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in the service of the Lord's people, and they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us also. And so we urged Titus, one of Paul's companions, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. Titus was sort of pastoring in Corinth at this point. So he said, Titus, hey, make sure you wrap up the Corinthians giving. He says, but and he's speaking to the Corinthians now, since you excel in everything, in faith and speech and knowledge and complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. I'm not commanding you, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich. And here's my judgment about what is best for you in this matter. Last year, you were the first not only to give, but also to have the desire to do so. Now finish the work so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it according to your means. For if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. All right, there's a whole bunch of stuff on giving here. I'm going to break it down into three, with just a little bit of a fourth thing on the back end that could help us tap into the sort of the grace of giving to see it change our lives, all right? So the first thing we see it here is that giving is a protest. It's a protest that changes the storyline of your life, right? Because in the New Testament world, everyone knew the Macedonians or the poor Macedonians, right? Does that sound delicate? The Macedonians, right? The poor Macedonians, right? They didn't have anything. We'll include them in the offering because we don't want to overlook them. But Corinth is there. They're gonna bring this thing through, right? Well, they redefined their entire identity. They're like, no, we're not going to be known for what we don't have. We're going to be known for what we can give. And you know what? We're going to give as much as we can because we love that. We're not going to be known as the people who don't have. We're going to be known as those who give. We're going to be known by those who give. And look what it says about Jesus. He says, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that through his poverty, so that you through his poverty might become rich. Now here's the thing. The Macedonians, they had experienced Jesus. They had met this Jesus. Jesus did not make them financially rich. But they were so much more rich than the Corinthians. Because why? They had no shame. They just gave. They pleaded that they might be able to give more. This is so awesome. We want to be all in. We want to be the kind of people that give. And they changed the story that they told that was told about them. You might have heard of something known as the Diderot effect. I came across the Diderot effect. A man wrote an essay in 1769 called Regrets on Parting with My Old Dressing Gown. Okay? Regrets on Parting with My Old Dressing Gown. It turns out that this gentleman named Diderot, at some point in time, was given a lovely, brand new crimson dressing gown. And when he started wearing his lovely, new, wonderfully crimson dressing gown, he started looking at everything else in his life like, oh, this is all a bunch of trash compared to my new dressing gown. And all of a sudden, he's like, man, if I have this awesome dressing gown, why am I sitting in this old chair? So he went out and bought a new chair. Then all of a sudden, he had a new chair. His rug looked terrible. He needed to go buy a new rug. And all of a sudden, he needed to go buy something else. He needed to go buy something else. And the man became bankrupt and destitute because of his brand new dressing gown. This is what he says. He said this. He said, I was the absolute master of my old dressing gown, but I have become a slave to my new one. Because of the contamination of sudden wealth, the poor man may take his ease without thinking of appearances, but the rich man is always under a strain. The brand new, beautiful dressing gown made him ashamed of everything else in his life. It told him a story about who he was that isn't true. You're on your way there, but sometime before the end of this day, you'll experience somewhere between 6,000 to 10,000 appeals for you to spend money. And every single one of those is built on the identity gap. And the identity gap is designed to help you see that you are not sufficiently you yet until you have their product. And every single way, they're going to continue to tell a story that you're insufficient, you don't have enough, you should be ashamed. And you should have more. You should have what they can offer you. The world is constantly telling a story about you. Macedonians, through their giving, relabeled themselves. When you learn to give, you tell a different story about yourself. You tell when you can give and you can start giving generously, start saying, I don't have to keep up with everyone else financially. I don't have to make an impression. I don't need that person's approval. You say, I can trust God with my debt. I can trust God even with my financial mistakes. You can look at yourself in the mirror and say, I look good enough. You can say to yourself, I feel good enough. And you can remind yourself that my happiness is not out there, waiting for me to achieve, waiting for me to grab, waiting for me to have enough money to access. My happiness isn't out there. It's already been given to me. Blessed are even the poor in spirit. And that I could only increase my happiness not through what I attain out there, but what I give from in here, tangibly, through my gifts, through my finances, through whatever way I can. People who have got the gift of giving have learned the secret of happiness. It's given from what God's already given us. They're shameless about it, and they experience God's blessing, and they feel blessed. Why? Because they've learned to give, and they can't stop doing it. Second thing we see in the story is that giving is about God. Giving is about God himself, and it's about our relationship between us and him. It's not between our relationship to anyone in need. We don't give to people who are in need primarily. It says in verse 5, it says, first of all, they gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us. Just like you are going to get a whole 6,000 to 10,000 messages today saying that you're not sufficient because you don't have this, you're going to get a lot of messages saying, hey, we could really use your help. We could really use your giving. And how do you survive this thing? The survival tactic when everybody's trying to grab for your wallet is to disengage with everybody. And so most Americans just walk around with this disengagement force field around them saying, I'm not listening, I'm not listening, I'm not listening, I'm not listening. But what if God wants you to hear? Because once we press the disengagement button on everybody, it's also tempting to put the disengagement button on with God. And what if God has called you to step into the moment and change it with your finances, to change it with your time, to change it with your influence? If you're constantly, and granted, like we all have to have a strong disengagement force field to protect ourselves from 6,000 to 10,000 advertisements, right? And all these other requests, right? We have to protect ourselves that way, but we can't protect ourselves from God. And what the Macedonians did that enabled them to be shameless is they were able to connect themselves vertically to God. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord and then to those around them. Giving is always going to be about God. It's not about your church. It's not about your organization. It's not about that specific need. It has to start with God. And then God leads you to the places that you might give. It's tempting to think that I give based upon the needs of an organization or my church or my family. And the danger here is that we start thinking in terms of comparisons versus contentment. The goofy thing about this whole thing is that it's hard to know how much money you should have, right? I know how much sleep I should get because when I don't get enough sleep, I've got a real measurable thing. I get really irritable and I'm miserable and it shows up in just about everything I do, right? I know how much work I'm supposed to do. I need to get the job done or work to the end of the day, right? How do you, I know how much health I'm supposed to have. Like, I should try to be as healthy as possible, right? But how much money should I have? How much money should I give? If we start, the temptation when it comes to that question is to start comparing ourselves to people around us, right? But the difficulty of that is there's always people with more than you, right? particularly around here, there's always going to be people with more than you. And but if you can leave some of what's closer, if you can if we see more closely where we're at, we'll see that there's folks who have a lot less than us. So should I feel guilt about all those who have a lot less than me? Because most of the world has less than me? Or should I feel ashamed that I don't have as much as those who are in my next door neighbor, whose kids got to do this and my kids didn't get to that, right? I mean, you see how shame just kind of continues to push its way in, or guilt pushes your way in, and what makes you say is like, look, I don't want to feel anything about this. Let me just shut out everybody and not think about it and just let Wall Street determine what I think and feel about money. See, comparison kills. God offers you contentment, and you don't have to be afraid to think about money. You could talk about money. You could talk about money all the time. Jesus talked about money all the time. When you're shameless about money, you're never afraid to talk about it. Jesus loved to talk about it. But comparison is the thing that's going to continue to pour shame in about what you don't have and guilt in about what others don't have. And what Paul is saying is here is the Macedonians didn't give because of their shame. They didn't give because of their guilt. They gave because of grace. Moses said to the people of Israel on their way, shortly before they went into the promised land, and he knew what was going to happen. They were going to go from folks who are sort of, gypsies out in the desert, and they're going to go into a really nice place, and they're going to do really, really well for themselves. And he warned them. He said, you may say to yourself, and this is in Deuteronomy chapter 8, he says, you may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. Giving has to be about us and God. And it's about us trusting him with what he's given us. It's trusting him as far as how happiness is realized. For a lot of folks, they find a lot of comfort by giving 10%, just giving a tithe and trusting him to pay back their debt when they get back to it, right? When God provides enough, trusting him as far as whatever this might be or whatever this goal might be. But they know that, look, God gets the first fruits of all their wealth. And because of that, they can trust him when they make a mistake. They can trust him when things don't go well. And they can live boldly and shamelessly. They can go buy nice things because God's given them the wealth, and they don't have to feel guilt about it. They get to enjoy it because it was never theirs in the first place. It was something that God gave them. They enjoy it. They're joyful about their money. They're not shamed about it. They're not guilt about it. They have no guilt about it. They feel free. Why? Because they feel close to God about it. Now, I am at some level describing the perfect person when it comes to money. All of us struggle. Those who have a lot of money, they struggle when it comes to money. Those who don't have a lot of money, they struggle when it comes to money. And everybody in between, they struggle when it comes to money. This might be one of the hardest things because how heavy the world is and how little opportunity we have to talk and process it. But giving, the third thing we see here is that giving is about growth. And it's something we can grow in, even come to excel in. I kind of love what Paul does with the Corinthians. He's got a little bit of banter going on with them. And the Corinthians are kind of always about sort of how they're the most special people, right? Because they are the most educated, they are the most wealthy, they really are the most talented folks in the ancient world, right? And so what does he do? He gets right in their face. He says, look, you guys are awesome at everything. You guys are great. He's like, man, since you excel in everything in faith, you have so much faith. He's like, you excel in speech. You guys are so much more articulate. And we all know how much you think you're more articulate than I am, Paul says. He didn't say that, but that's just me dropping that passive aggression in there. Anyway, he says, you excel in faith. You excel in speech. You really are knowledgeable. And you are earnest. And we see you growing in love. You also can excel in this grace of giving. Go for it. Go for it. He calls it out of them, and I call it out of you too. We live in the wealthiest county. More than 50% of our congregation has post-college degrees. We're more well-educated than just about every other church on the planet. You excel in education. You excel in being really cool people. You excel in being really friendly. Excel at the grace of giving. And you'll find it in your happiness. You'll see it in your joy. Yet growth requires something that none of us are really very interested in. When some of you might have planted some flowers this fall, and what you did is you took a seed and you put it in the ground. Now, if you put that seed and you stick it in an envelope 100 years from now, that'll still be a viable seed. It'll be fine. It'll work just fine, right? But once that seed goes into the ground and the shell cracks, the seed becomes vulnerable. A root starts reaching out to find something to produce life in it. And if it doesn't do that, that seed's going to die. Just about anything in life for you to grow in will require vulnerability. For you to grow in love, it means you're going to need to extend love towards someone, and you might not get it back. To grow when it comes into speech, like he was challenging the Corinthians to do, it means you're going to need to stand up in front of people, and it might not go well. I'll never forget the first sermon I was given to do. I had to do in front of a community of 700 young adults on a Sunday night at 7 p.m. on a passage that I'm still not sure I fully understand, right? And man, I felt so nervous. I felt so vulnerable. And it went okay. The second message, it bombed. It was awful. My second sermon was terrible. And you know what my pastor did? My pastor said, "Hey, let's watch that on video." And we sat in the middle two seats and watched the entire sermon, word for word for word. He would pause and say, "Why were you saying that? What was going on there?" And it was awful. It was so vulnerable. But you know what? It helped me get better. You don't get better without vulnerability. And my challenge, if you want to excel at the grace of giving and you want everything that comes with it, the peace, the shamelessness, the joy, it's going to require some vulnerability. What would it look like for you to be vulnerable in your generosity? What would it look like for you to trust God with your money, to be generous to somebody, towards your church, another organization? What would it look like for you to have to trust God to show up to meet your needs? As that happens, the people who give generously, they've learned that they can find that God will show up, and they get to experience the joy of being a giver. When the gift, one of the things we've been saying, and just about every one of these sermons, we say, when a church values a gift, there's certain things that happen in the life of the church, right? When people value the gift of faith in the church, people look beyond the circumstances and they attempt great things for God, right? When people value the gift of mercy, they begin including more and more people, and the church gets more and more diverse and more loving, right? When the church values the gift of giving, what ends up happening is the church starts thinking in abundance mentalities. They don't think, well, we can't really do this because, well, it's all we got. They're not conservative. When a church doesn't value the gift of giving, they're typically ashamed to ever talk about money. They're ashamed about finances. They're ashamed to try things. They will rarely take risks. Why? Because God's not the kind of guy that shows up when we're vulnerable. Well, when churches do value the gift of giving, what ends up happening is people dream and they believe in abundance mentality, right? Jesus said, "Ask and it will be given. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open," right? There's all sorts of people that pray those prayers, and people with the gift of giving have learned that they get to be the answers to some of those prayers. And when people start seeing God show up for them financially, all of a sudden they realize that God can show up for them in the other areas where they feel shame, guilt, and vulnerability in their lives, and people start living free and joyful. Why? Because the people with the gift of giving, they are leading out. This is not something we earn. This is not something we prove. It's not something we achieve. 3 times in the passage, it says that giving is a grace. And those who have learned to give will be the first people to say, like, nah. And I regularly say thank you to those who give and give generously around here. And almost always they say, no, it's my gift. It's my grace. This is my pleasure. I get to do this. I get to do this. I get to make an impact by giving in this way. It's a grace. It's something we receive. And man, a grace, when it comes to the scriptures, is something that draws you close to God. It draws you close to God. Because you can't give without having to trust him. And when you start to give, you begin to learn the joy that Jesus had. The joy that Jesus had, that when he was rich, for your sake, my sake, he became poor, not just financially poor. He became financially poor. He became relationally poor. He became emotionally poor. He became physically poor. He became poor in every single aspect that poverty can create. He allowed poverty itself to swallow him up into death so that we might know that we have an inheritance, that we have a heavenly Father who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, has everything we need for life and godliness, and we can know that that is ours forever. There's more to say about this, but I want to continue on our worship. We're going to have the opportunity to reflect and express gratitude for the ways God has been good and generous to us. And so would you stand with me? I'm going to pray, and we'll sing one last song before we go forward. God, thank you for Jesus. Thank you that in his death on the cross, he experienced our poverty, not just our financial poverty. He experienced our guilt. He experienced our shame. In his death, he absorbed the curse of sin. In his new life, in new resurrection life, he has solved for the healing of all shame. And he's given us gifts that we could walk in and enjoy the life of following Jesus as a giver. God, I pray for each of us that you'd help us to take a next step in vulnerability in order to know the joy of being a giver like you are. In your name we pray.